June 6, 1944, the sea was angry that morning, gray, heaving, and unforgiving. At exactly 07:26 a.m., on June 6, 1944, the ramp of landing craft 912 dropped with a clang that echoed louder than the thunder of shells. Private Thomas Hardy, 19 years old from West Yorkshire, jumped straight into waist-deep water with his boots already filled. His helmet sat crooked, rifle clutched tight across his chest. Not just any rifle, but a battered short-magazine Lee-Enfield No. by WWI-Era 3, issued in 1942, but built in 1916, the same year his grandfather died in the Somme. Around him, men shouted and splashed forward through the surf, towards Sword Beach. German MG-42s raked the sand ahead, cutting down bodies like wheat in a windstorm. Tom saw a man get hit in the neck and drop without a sound. Another lost his grip on his rifle, and it vanished into the surf. But Tom never let go of his SMLE, not for a second. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't new. But it worked. Always did. Behind the concrete bunkers and machine gun nests, the Germans were fighting with their prized Carabiner 98K rifles, sleek, modern, built with precision that German engineers had bragged about since the 1930s. Tom had seen one up close in a training camp outside Dover. A German POW had been captured with it intact. Officers passed it around like some kind of museum piece. "Look at the bolt on this," one corporal said. "Tight as a drum." Tom had cycled the bolt once and handed it back. "Too tight," he muttered. "Wouldn't trust it in the mud?" Now, with chaos erupting all around, Tom found cover behind a chunk of shrapnel-scarred seawall. His section commander, Corporal Banks, crawled next to him, panting. He was bleeding from a shrapnel graze on his left arm. "Keep low, Hardy. Wait till the Bren crew gives us covering fire. Then we move." Tom nodded, wiping salt water and sweat from his eyes. He checked his rifle. 10 rounds in the mag, safety off, sights set to 200 yards. It had seen better days. The wood was scratched, the metal dulled by years of grime and oil. But it cycled smooth, even now. The bolt handle moved with a short, sharp click. No resistance, no sticking, not like the 98K he'd tested back in Dover, with its perfect tolerances and slow, deliberate action. 3, 2, now! Banks shouted. They ran. Gunfire screamed past. The Bren gun to their left barked out a stream of suppressive fire, keeping the Germans' heads down just long enough. Tom threw himself into a shell crater just below the dunes and aimed upward. A German helmet flickered into view behind a pillbox 150 yards away. He fired once. The recoil was familiar, like an old friend's shove. The man dropped back behind the concrete. Tom didn't wait. He cycled the bolt, fired again, then again. He wasn't counting, just moving. Click, bang, click, bang. It was instinct. Everything his instructors had drilled into him at Aldershot and Folkestone now lived in his bones. The mad minute wasn't theory anymore. It was life and death. 3 more rounds. Then he reloaded, reached into his webbing, pulled a fresh 10-round magazine, and slammed it home. 3 seconds, maybe less. To his right, another British rifleman fired so quickly it sounded like a machine gun to anyone unfamiliar. Tom remembered a quote from one of the old sergeants at the rifle range. "Let the Jerrys bring their engineering marvels. We'll drown 'em in bullets before they finish reloading." The fighting on Sword Beach didn't end in minutes. It dragged into hours. But the British line pushed forward, inch by bloody inch. By noon, Tom had fired over 90 rounds. His shoulder was sore and his ears were ringing, but his rifle never jammed. Not once. As the fighting paused near a burned-out machine gun nest, he knelt beside the body of a German soldier, a young man no older than himself. The dead man's Carabiner 98K lay nearby, barely scratched. Tom picked it up, worked the bolt. Stiff, precise, clean. He set it back down gently and looked at his own Enfield, now caked in sand and blood. The wood was darker than before, the metal steaming in the heat. It looked tired, Ancient even, but it still worked. "Still the better tool," he muttered, patting the stock like one would a loyal dog. Behind him, Corporal Banks lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "They gave us a museum piece, Tom, and it's still bloody killing Jerry's faster than anything they got." Tom didn't answer. He just nodded, reloaded another magazine, and kept moving forward. By June 9th, 1944, the British had pushed 6 miles inland from Sword Beach. The Germans weren't running. They were digging in. Every hedgerow was an ambush, every village a trap. And in the thick of it, Tom Hardy was learning what war really looked like. It was around 3:00 p.m. when 3 RD platoon entered the outskirts of the village of Cambs-en-Plaine, a quiet little hamlet that hadn't known peace since June 6th. The sun beat down hard. The air smelled like burnt stone and wet straw. Somewhere a cow mooed as if nothing had happened. But the silence was a lie. The place was crawling with Germans, Panzer Grenadiers, the veterans said. "Stay sharp," muttered Corporal Banks as the section hugged the stone wall near a farmstead. He held up a clenched fist. Everyone froze. Tom's heart was slamming in his chest, but his hands stayed steady. SMLE raised, finger just resting on the trigger. He could hear the faint clicking of boots on cobblestones from behind a barn door just 40 yards ahead. Then the door burst open. 3 Germans rushed out, shouting, rifles raised. A 4th followed with an MP-40, already spraying lead. Time didn't slow. It shattered. Tom squeezed the trigger before his mind caught up. Bang! 1 down. He worked the bolt, no hesitation, and fired again. Bang! Second man spun and fell. The MP-40 rattled, kicking up dust inches from Tom's boots. A bullet grazed his webbing, tearing through his field dressing pouch. He dropped to one knee, aimed low, and squeezed. Bang! The 3rd German crumpled over his knees. The last man turned to flee back into the barn. Tom fired once more into the back of his coat. The man crashed into the doorway and didn't get up. The whole thing took maybe 5 seconds. 4 shots, 4 hits. Corporal Banks turned slowly, eyes wide. "Bloody hell, Hardy," he breathed. "You sure you're not hiding a Bren gun in that Enfield?" Tom didn't smile. He was still shaking, still locked in that moment where sound disappears and instinct takes over. But his rifle, the old .303 he'd cursed during training for being too long, too heavy, had never failed him. Banks crouched beside the dead Germans, picking through their gear. He picked up one of the K98Ks, still warm. They look shiny, don't they? But the bolts on these buggers always feel like you're dragging them through treacle, he muttered. Tom leaned over, took the rifle, and tried the action. It resisted. Dust in the receiver. A shell jammed halfway in the chamber. He held it up, looked his corporal dead in the eyes, and dropped it in the dirt. "I'll stick with Granddad's hammer," Tom said flatly. They moved on through the village, house to house, hedge to hedge. Snipers took potshots from church towers. Mortars dropped without warning. And yet, in every exchange, it wasn't the machine guns or mortars that held the line. It was rifles, dozens of Enfields spitting death like clockwork. In the orchard behind the village, they regrouped. Tom sat against a cherry tree, reloading magazines from loose rounds in a bandolier. His hands were black with oil, sweat, and blood. Private Alan Briggs, just 18 and fresh from Leeds, sat beside him, wide-eyed. He hadn't fired a single round. He just froze behind a wall while Tom's rifle had done the work of 5 men. You really did that with that thing?" Briggs asked, staring at the Enfield like it was Excalibur. Tom didn't look up. "It's not the rifle, mate. It's knowing she'll fire when you need her to." Briggs touched his own rifle, also an SMLE, though newer looking, like he was suddenly holding treasure. The sergeant came by just before dusk. "Word from HQ. They found a pile of captured 98Ks in the church." Want us to send some back for intel? Tom snorted. What intel? That the Germans build rifles too fussy for real war? The sergeant grinned. Well, lad, maybe you should write the bloody manual. That night, as the platoon bedded down in the ruins of a French farmhouse, Tom lay his Enfield beside him like it was part of his body. The bolt was still smooth, the wood warm from the day's heat. It had fired 46 rounds that afternoon, and the only maintenance it got was a wipe with a dirty rag and a bit of leftover bacon grease. He stared at the stars through a hole in the roof and whispered, "You're not pretty. But you're mine." Somewhere out there, the Germans were loading their precision-machined bolts, clipping in 5 rounds at a time, and dreaming of the day they could shoot first. Tom? He was already ready to fire again. June 14, 1944. Near Tilly-sur-Seulles. Normandy, the rain started falling just after noon, cold and relentless, turning the fields into swamps and the dirt tracks into sludge. The hedgerows, tall, ancient walls of thorn and earth, closed in from every side. Somewhere out there, beyond the green walls and the thick mist, the Waffen SS were waiting. Tom Hardy moved quietly through the bocage with 3rd Platoon, each step a squelch of mud. His SMLE hung across his chest, wrapped in an oilskin to keep the worst of the water out. He knew it wouldn't matter. The rifle didn't care about the rain. Never had. They were ordered to recon a narrow lane, just wide enough for a farm cart, that snaked toward the village of Langevre. German forces were dug in deep, and every corner looked like death. "Stay sharp," Banks whispered. "If they hit us, it'll be from the flanks." Tom's boots slipped in the muck. He caught himself on a root, cursing softly. Just then, a single crack echoed from the hedgerow to the left. Rifle shot. Private Briggs, the young lad from Leeds, dropped like a sack of stones. "No scream! Just gone! Ambush!" Someone shouted. All hell broke loose. Automatic fire roared from both flanks. MG-42s laying down a storm of bullets that chopped branches and tore leaves in a whirlwind of noise. Grenades burst along the lane, showering them with dirt and bark. The platoon dived into the mud, crawling for whatever cover the hedgerows offered. Tom rolled into a ditch, rifle in hand, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the gunfire. He slammed a magazine into the Enfield, chambered around, and peered through the rain-blurred sight. He caught a glimpse, muzzle flash, 40 yards away, behind a log. Bang, bolt. Bang. He wasn't thinking anymore, just firing, working the bolt, shifting aim. The SMLE's action, smooth and wet but never seizing, kept him in the fight. Nearby, a Bren team was down. Gun jammed. One of the gunners screaming, his leg half gone. Tom crawled to the edge of the ditch and laid suppressing fire toward the hedgerow. 10 rounds. Then another mag. He didn't even look at the rifle, just moved like muscle memory had taken over. Beside him, Corporal Banks shouted, "Left flank's breaking! Lay it on, lads!" Tom looked down the line and saw 2 Germans charging through the hedge. Rifles up, one with a bayonet. He didn't hesitate. Bang! The first German dropped mid-sprint. Bolt. Bang! The second stumbled, hit low in the hip. Tom worked the bolt again, but before he could fire, a third appeared. Too close now. Tom swung the SMLE like a club. Walnut stock met steel helmet with a crack that echoed louder than gunfire. The German dropped. Tom's hands were bleeding. His rifle's wood stock was dented, but the bolt still cycled when he checked it. Rain poured from the brim of his helmet. His face was mud and blood, and he was alive. An hour later, the ambush had broken. The Germans pulled back under mortar fire from the rear. British casualties were heavy, but they held the lane. Afterwards, the section regrouped in a soggy pasture. The medics were working on the wounded, and the dead were laid in a row under gas capes. Private Briggs was one of them. The lad hadn't even emptied his first magazine. Tom sat down, too tired to cry, and started cleaning his rifle, or at least wiping it down with what remained of his tea towel. The action was gritty from dirt and leaves, but it still ran. Corporal Banks knelt beside him. "You were fast out there, real fast. That thing's a bloody cannon in your hands." Tom didn't answer, just took out a fresh mag, loaded 10 rounds, and closed the bolt. Banks lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. "I'll tell you this much. I picked up a Mauser off one of the dead. Thought I'd try it. Tight as a banker's arse. First round stuck halfway out the chamber." He shook his head. "I'll never doubt that ugly old beast of yours again." Tom looked down at his rifle, mud-streaked, soaked, and chipped from the butt. But it was still ready, always ready. The rain kept falling, and so did the Germans. By July 9th, 1944, the RAF had bombed Caen for 2 nights straight. What was once a medieval city of churches and stone houses now looked like a kicked anthill. Shattered walls, smoke curling from collapsed roofs, and rubble in every street. The Germans were dug in tight. Fallschirmjäger and SS, hardened, cornered, and vicious. Private Tom Hardy stood at the edge of Rue de Bayeux with 3rd Platoon, heart hammering in his chest. His SMLE hung ready, sling tight around his shoulder, muzzle aimed low. They were about to cross into the city proper, through a gap blasted in a garden wall. The plan? Clear the street house by house. No air support, no tanks, just boots, grenades, and bullets. "Urban fighting's a bastard," Corporal Banks muttered, crouching beside Tom. "They'll be in basements, attics, behind bloody curtains. Keep that rifle tight and your eyes tighter." Tom nodded, sweat soaking into his battle dress. The sun was blazing, but the city smelled cold. Burnt wood, rotting food, and something worse. Death. As they moved through the first courtyard, the sniper fire began. A shot cracked from a second-story window. One man dropped, screaming and clutching his side. Another froze, just long enough for a second shot to take him clean through the neck. Tom ducked behind a broken cart, heart pounding. He scanned the shattered buildings. There, a flicker of movement behind a curtain. He aimed just above the first-floor window and fired. The recoil slammed into his shoulder, the familiar kick of trust. He cycled the bolt quickly, eyes still on the target. Movement again. A figure dropped from the window. Limp. One down. Corporal Banks signaled, and they moved. Door after door, alley after alley, clearing each with a rhythm born of repetition and fear. Tom's Enfield barked like thunder in tight spaces. No long-range sniping now. It was 15 yards, 10 yards, sometimes less. They kicked in the door of a butcher's shop, or what was left of it, and walked straight into a German MG nest tucked behind the counter. The Bren team behind Tom was too slow. One gunner took a round to the shoulder before he could open fire. Tom didn't blink. He dropped to one knee, raised the SMLE, and fired. Bang! The German behind the MG slumped sideways. Bang! Another rose up. Tom dropped him before the man could even raise his weapon. He slammed the bolt home again, fired twice more, then paused to reload. 10-round magazine out, fresh one in. 3 seconds. Clean, fast, lethal. Behind him, one of the newer lads gasped. "That thing's ancient, but bloody hell, you use it like a machine gun." Tom didn't smile, just nodded and moved on. They pushed deeper into Caen. By 1600 hours, the section had cleared 7 buildings, taken 3 prisoners, and lost 4 men. Most of the fighting was at close quarters, brutal, personal, terrifying. The Mauser rifles the Germans dropped were sleek, yes, but they jammed after the 3rd or 4th shot if the chamber got fouled with dust or plaster. Several of Tom's mates tried picking them up, One cursed and tossed his aside after a misfeed nearly got him killed in a stairwell. Tom's SMLE? Still spitting lead like it had on Sword Beach. And now, it wasn't just a tool, it was legend. That evening, with the sun low and the church bells of Caen silenced by artillery, Tom sat behind a blown-out wall, counting his remaining rounds. His rifle steamed in the cooling air, coated in soot and dust, but still perfect. Still ready? He heard someone crying nearby. A young French girl, maybe 12, huddled beside the ruins of a bakery. He reached into his rations, pulled out a biscuit, and offered it. She looked at him, then at the rifle, and whispered something he didn't understand. But the fear was fading from her face. Corporal Banks walked up and dropped beside him. "Reckon we'll be through Caen in a few more days," he said. "And then what?" "More towns to clear. More bastards to shoot." Tom looked at the old, battered rifle in his lap. Chipped wood, scratched metal, still hot from the last shot. He ran a finger down the barrel. "As long as this holds, I don't care where they send us." Banks laughed. "That bloody museum piece? You'll be buried with it, mate." Tom didn't laugh. He just nodded. Because in Caen, where newer rifles failed and perfect engineering cracked under pressure, it was the old .303 Enfield. Tired, ugly, out of date, that kept killing, kept firing, kept protecting the lads who carried it. And Tom knew one thing for certain. If it came down to one more shot, one more second, one more chance to live, he wouldn't trade his rifle for every Mauser in the German army. By August 19th, 1944, the smell was everywhere. Diesel, blood, and burnt flesh. Thick in the August heat, it coated your throat, clung to your clothes, and sat in your lungs long after you moved on. The Germans were retreating. Not fast enough. British, Canadian, and Polish forces had closed the ring around Falaise, and now the pocket was hell on earth. Every field, every road, every hedgerow was a killing ground. Panzer columns tried breaking out under cover of night, desperate and savage, and the Allies were stretched thin, trying to hold the lines. Private Tom Hardy hadn't slept in 36 hours. He was black from head to toe with dust and grime. His boots had split along the sides, and his SMLE still hanging on his shoulder like it was born there. He sat in a ditch beside a sunken farm road with what was left of 3rd Platoon. 9 men out of 32. They'd been holding the line northeast of Chambois when German tanks slammed into them like a hammer. A platoon of Fallschirmjäger had followed, fast and ruthless, sweeping through like wolves. The British lines were collapsing in patches, overrun by sheer weight of numbers. Their new orders were blunt. Hold the lane at all costs. No artillery support. No tank cover. No backup, just rifles, and men too exhausted to be afraid anymore. At 1741 hours, they saw the dust first, a wave rising over the horizon. Then the shapes. Gray uniforms. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. "Christ," Corporal Banks whispered, peering through binoculars. "It's a full company. And we've got, what? 2 Brens, 9 rifles, and 3 working brains?" Tom didn't say anything. He pulled out a fresh magazine and slammed it home. The bolt closed smooth as ever. The SMLE was hot to the touch. He hadn't cleaned it since Caen. It didn't care. "You all right, Hardy?" Banks asked. Tom looked up. His face was a mask of dirt and sweat. "Just tell me when to start." At 1746, the Germans opened fire. Mortars first, thudding in the fields behind. Then rifles. Tom saw a man to his left take one in the chest. No scream. Just collapsed like a puppet, with its strings cut. He didn't flinch. He rested the SMLE on the edge of the ditch, exhaled, and squeezed. Bang. Bolt. Bang. Again. Again. The Enfield kicked like a mule, but stayed true. He fired 6 rounds in quick succession, adjusted, and fired 4 more. The Germans kept coming, spreading into the wheat like shadows. Tom reloaded in 3 seconds flat. Beside him, Banks fired bursts from a Bren until it jammed again. "This bloody thing's had it," he shouted, ripping at the receiver. Tom didn't stop. Bang! 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 His SMLE spat fire and smoke, the barrel glowing faintly. He shifted positions, rolled behind a stone trough, and kept firing. A Mauser cracked nearby. Sharp, surgical. Tom ducked, fired back at the flash. The bolt on the Enfield moved like silk. Wet, gritty silk. But it still moved. The fight turned savage. Germans reached the ditch. One leapt in, bayonet drawn. Tom blocked with the rifle stock. The walnut cracked, but didn't break. He brought the butt up hard into the man's jaw, then spun the rifle and fired point blank into his gut. Click, click, boom. The recoil knocked the man back over the edge. Corporal Banks was beside him now, swinging a shovel like an axe. "We're still alive," he shouted. Tom fired again. "Not for long if you keep yelling like that." They laughed for a second. The kind of laugh only men in the middle of madness can make. By 1815, the field was a smoking ruin. Bodies everywhere. The ditch held. Somehow, reinforcements finally arrived. A group of Canadians with Shermans, rolling in with engines howling and guns blazing. The few Germans still alive ran for the woods. Tom sat down in the blood-soaked grass, breath ragged, hands trembling. The SMLE rested across his lap. It had fired 72 rounds in under an hour. It was filthy, burnt, clogged with blood and wheat dust. But the bolt still cycled. Still, Corporal Banks collapsed beside him, pulling off his helmet and pouring canteen water over his face. "No what?" he gasped. "You keep that rifle after the war. Hang it on your wall. Give it a bloody name." "You've earned it." Tom stared at the rifle. "Don't need to name it," he said quietly. "It already knows who it is." November 3rd, 1944. Forest south of Antwerp. Belgium, the frost came early that year. By the first week of November, the mud had turned stiff, the nights cruel, and the fog so thick you could lose a man 5 feet ahead. Tom Hardy's fingers were swollen, blistered, and red from cold. His breath curled in the air like smoke, but he hadn't smoked in days. Ran out of matches. Or maybe it was weeks now. No one counted days anymore. They just counted who was still alive. British forces had broken into Belgium, chasing the retreating Wehrmacht north toward the Netherlands. But it wasn't easy now. The Germans weren't running like they used to. They were digging in again, using the trees, the cold, the mist to strike and vanish, and the woods around Antwerp had become a graveyard in slow motion. Tom trudged through frozen leaves, boots crunching softly underfoot. His SMLE, wrapped in rags to keep the frost off the trigger guard, hung across his chest like a lifeline. The wood was darkened from months of handling, chipped and worn, but the bolt still ran. Always ran. "Any word on the flank?" Corporal Banks asked from behind him. Tom shook his head. "Nothing? Could be ghosts out there." And it felt like ghosts. The forest was silent. No birds, no movement. Just fog and branches and the ever-present stench of rotting uniforms buried in shallow graves under the trees. Then it came. A shot. Sharp. Close. The point man dropped without a word. Bullet through the eye. The platoon scattered behind logs and stumps. Rifles up. Breath held. "Sniper," Banks hissed. 30 yards, maybe less. Another shot. Missed this time. Chipped bark near Tom's head. He didn't flinch. Just sighted down the path and waited. The fog shifted. A flicker of movement behind a moss-covered oak. He didn't even think. Bang! The SMLE cracked like a whip in the frozen air. The rifle jerked in his grip. Even after months, That recoil was still as violent as ever. The bolt snapped open, round ejected with a hiss of steam in the cold, and a second round chambered. A shape fell behind the tree. Hard. Tom held still, listening. Nothing. After a moment, they moved, slowly, carefully. The sniper lay dead, wrapped in a white smock. Young, maybe 17. Banks looked down and kicked the snow. Still training kids, he muttered. Desperate bastards. They searched the body. Mauser, 98K, pristine condition. Tom worked the bolt out of habit. Tight, precise, cold as ice. He tossed it aside. No good if it won't fire in this, he said, gesturing to the air around them. Banks nodded. Ours still work, though. It was true. While German rifles were freezing shut, British SMLEs were still cycling. The trick? Simplicity. British soldiers were told to strip all oil from the bolt and run them dry in freezing weather. No grease to freeze, no slick film to turn to sludge. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Back at the tree line, they dug in. No fire, no hot food, just hard rations and silence. Tom pulled his blanket tighter, teeth chattering. His fingers wrapped around the Lee-Enfield stock, still warm from firing. Private Hughes, a farm boy from Wales, huddled beside him. You reckon this war's ever gonna end? He whispered. Tom didn't answer right away. He looked at his rifle, thought about everything it had been through. Mud, blood, sand, snow, and how it had never let him down. Yeah, he said finally, but not before this old girl gives it everything she's got. That night, the Germans tried to infiltrate under the fog. Silent footsteps, cold blades, soft whispers in broken English. But the first one who crept too close caught a .303 round straight through the chest. Tom fired from under his blanket, bolt working clean even in freezing air. By morning, they found 6 German bodies frozen stiff in the underbrush. None of the British were dead. And the rifle? Still loaded. Still warm, still ready. Loaded. Still warm, still ready. March 3rd, 1945. Outskirts of Wesel, Germany. They were less than 20 miles from the Rhine when the ground gave way. It had been a quiet morning. Too quiet. Tom Hardy walked point with a small forward recon team. 5 men, a radio, and nerves frayed like worn-out boots. The terrain was ruined farmland, frost-burned and littered with wreckage. Germany was falling. Everyone said it. But the dying hadn't slowed. If anything, it was getting worse. Fanatics. Hitler Youth. Old men with Panzerfausts and hatred in their eyes. They didn't care about surrender. They cared about blood. By 08:20 hours, the team was clearing a broken road flanked by burnt-out barns and skeletal trees. Just beyond the bend, a small village slouched in the mist, like a dying animal. And then came the crack. Not gunfire. Wood. The road caved beneath Private Hughes, a hidden trench, and from it rose fire. German paratroopers, not fleeing, waiting. The ambush was perfect. Machine guns opened up from the tree line. Mortars dropped behind them, cutting off escape. It was a kill box. Hughes never screamed. His body vanished in a burst of smoke and splinters. Tom dropped to his belly, rolled behind a rusted cart, and raised the SMLE. His hands moved without thought. Mag loaded, bolt closed. Corporal Banks shouted orders, but the sound was swallowed by bullets and panic. 3 Germans rushed the ditch. One carried a flamethrower. Bang! The man's head snapped sideways. Bolt! Bang! The second dropped, screaming. Bolt, the third slipped, fell, and Tom's third shot punched through his thigh, spinning him into the mud. The SMLE worked like it was part of him. Bolt sliding fast, action still smooth, even now. Even here, Banks scrambled to Tom's side, clutching his radio. "Can't raise command. We're cut off!" A mortar round hit the cart behind them, lifted it into the air and shattered wood across their backs. Tom was thrown, ears ringing. When he opened his eyes, Banks was gone. Blood everywhere. Just a hand, still holding the useless radio. Tom lay stunned in a crater, half deaf, half blind, the world spinning. His SMLE had been thrown from his grasp. He crawled toward it on numb hands. His ears whined, his eyes watered. But there it was, covered in black dirt, hot to the touch, but whole. He grabbed it, rolled over, and froze. A German soldier stood 10 feet away. Young, pale, helmet gone. Rifle raised. Time didn't slow. It died. Tom lifted the Lee-Enfield, fired without aiming. Click. The round failed. Too much dirt. Jammed. The German stepped closer, shouting something in angry, slurred German. Tom pulled the bolt open, slamming it back hard. It groaned, resisted, but moved. He chambered another round. The German fired. Missed. Tom fired back. Bang. The Lee-Enfield roared. The German fell. Silence. A long, cold silence. Tom sat alone in the crater, panting, bleeding from his left arm. Around him, the world had gone still again. Smoke drifted over ruined buildings. Snowflakes began to fall. Only then did he look down at the SMLE. The wood was cracked along the lower handguard. The bolt was covered in mud, black grease, and blood. But it had fired. Even after all that, he started laughing. Not joy, not relief, but something between madness and wonder. The other survivors, 4 of them, crawled back to him minutes later. Dazed, burned, but alive. "We're pulling back," one said. "Too hot." "Tanks'll finish the job later," Tom nodded. He couldn't feel his left hand, but his right still cradled the rifle. "Leave the Jerrys their bunkers," he muttered. "I'll take my old girl and a pint." They hobbled back through the trees toward the rear lines. The rifle slung over his shoulder like always, the barrel still warm. March 5th, 1945. British Field Hospital, west bank of the Rhine. 2 days later, Tom lay in a cot, arm bandaged, eyes staring at the canvas roof above him. A nurse walked by, carrying a bundle of gear from recovered soldiers. She paused at his bed, holding something wrapped in cloth. "This yours?" Tom sat up slowly. The cloth was peeled back. The Lee-Enfield. Still dirty, still whole. He reached for it with his good hand and nodded. "It's mine." The nurse hesitated. "They said it jammed on you." Tom smiled, slow and tired. Only once. April 26, 1945. Village of Oosterbeek, Holland. The fighting was dying out, but no one told the bullets. British troops had already crossed the Rhine. American flags flew over towns that were rubble 2 weeks ago, but small pockets of German resistance still clung to buildings like shadows. Fanatics, deserters, boys with nothing left but a rifle and fear. Tom Hardy stepped off the back of a Bren carrier just past dawn. The village of Oosterbeek looked peaceful from a distance. Red brick homes, tidy gardens, trees just beginning to bloom again after the frost. But up close, it was hollow. Every window had a black eye. Doors blown off hinges. Silence hung over everything, but not the comforting kind. His section had been ordered to sweep the village. "Clear and hold," they said. Tom didn't ask who the enemy was anymore. At his side, slung like always, was the SMLE. It had been cleaned, oiled. The cracked stock now reinforced with wire. The bolt still cycled smooth. She looked tired, but she was still ready, just like him. As they passed through a half-demolished barn, a rustling noise stopped them cold. Corporal Banks, somehow still alive after everything, raised a hand. Back wall. he whispered. Tom moved without thought. Rifle up, 1 step, 2, around a corner. And there he was, a boy, no older than 15, blonde hair, dirty uniform, a German rifle clutched to his chest, an old carabiner, held tight like a teddy bear. He didn't even raise it. He just froze, staring at Tom. They locked eyes, and Tom saw it. The same fear he'd felt back on Sword Beach. The same exhaustion. Same question in both their eyes. Are we still doing this? Corporal Banks arrived a second later. Rifle raised. Shoot him! He hissed. But Tom didn't. He looked down at the SMLE in his hands. It was heavy now. Heavier than it had ever been. Not from weight. From years. From ghosts. From every round it had fired. Every man it had saved. And every man it hadn't. He lowered it. The boy blinked. Still frozen, Tom stepped forward, slow, and took the carabiner gently from his hands. It wasn't loaded. Go home, he said softly, in English. The boy nodded once, didn't cry, just turned and walked away down the ruined street. Corporal Banks exhaled. You've gone soft, mate. No, Tom replied, slinging the rifle. I've gone done. May 8th, 1945. VE Day. The war was over. London roared with flags and champagne, and strangers dancing in the streets. But Tom stood in silence at a train station in Kent, the SMLE wrapped in cloth under one arm. A railway officer spotted it and said gently, You can leave that here, son. We'll take care of it. Tom shook his head. No, I'm bringing her home. July 14th, 1969, West Yorkshire. The rifle still hung over Tom's fireplace, mounted in walnut and brass. He'd sanded the wood down himself, cleaned the barrel, kept the bolt oiled. His grandson, Jack, stared at it one summer afternoon. Did you ever fire that, Granddad? Tom looked at it for a long time, then nodded, a few times. Did it ever jam? Tom smiled. Once. He didn't say when. Didn't need to, because the rifle was never about the metal, or the bullets, or even the war. It was about trust. It was about the moments between the noise, when a man had nothing left but the breath in his lungs and the rifle in his hands. And it was about surviving long enough to come home. The end. To come home. The end.